Welcome back to the Dreaming and Doing podcast. I am super excited about the conversation we're about to have today. I am here with Jordan Bramhall, who is a therapist at LifeSpring Counseling Services. And Jordan was previously trained as a Clifton Strengths facilitator. And so she's going to be here with us today talking about strengths and why it's important for you to know what they are. So welcome, Jordan.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
This is your first podcast, Jordan.
This is my very first podcast, Melissa, but I'm excited that it's your podcast that I'm kind of breaking into the podcast world with.
Yes, awesome. So tell us, what exactly are strengths? When you think about strengths, when you're talking about them, what are strengths and why are they so important?
Yeah, so kind of just to give a little bit of background as to where I'm coming from with my strength-based approach and how I view strengths is most of the work that I do, how I view strengths, is based on the work by Don Clifton, and he is considered the founder of strengths-based psychology. So when we're thinking about strengths from that lens, strengths are really the result of an equation. And so that equation is your natural talents times investment equals strengths. So your talents are the things that you are naturally good at. They are natural ways of thinking, being, doing things that are just an innate ability for you. And the more that you invest into those talents, the more that you practice them, the more that you intentionally put effort into using your talents, the more that they become a strength. And a strength is like this near perfect way of doing things. It is a talent that you are so inherently good at. It is something that comes so naturally to you, something that you've put a lot of practice into. And that is how you get a strength. And why strengths are so important is because in life, there is a million ways to do all the things that we do. There's a million ways to study for that exam you have coming up. There is a million ways to go about getting a job. But what's the best way to do that for you? And that's by focusing on what your strengths are. So we know what our strengths are. We know the best way to go about achieving our dreams.
So, in my experience, Jordan, and maybe this is yours as well, but for example, when I'm working with people in one on one therapy, a lot of people have a really hard time recognizing their strengths. Sometimes, even when other people point out their strengths, they have a hard time receiving them, or they just they just really genuinely don't know what they are. So, how can someone find out what their strengths are if they are like, I don't know what they are, I just don't see what you see?
Yeah, I think to your point, Melissa, one thing I want to say is that something that I've really noticed is that people have such a hard time talking good about themselves. People have such a hard time knowing what they're good at and accepting that they're good at that. They want to be humble. They think it's selfish to talk about themselves, talk about their strengths. So, first things first is I want to say, it is a-okay to know what you are good at and to own it. But so how can you know what your strengths are? I see that too. Clients with anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, they don't know what their strengths are. They don't think they're good at anything. So first thing that I recommend anybody doing is to go online, Google a list of strengths and their definitions, and it's just to read through that list and see if you have any sort of gut reaction to one of those strengths, maybe a handful, and see, okay, maybe there's something there. Maybe I am good at this. So that would be one route, is to see if you can come up a list on your own. And maybe you don't fully believe it's a strength, but you can pinpoint that there is one way that I use that strength. I use that ability. You can also talk to a friend, talk to a family member, ask them, what do you see in me that I'm good at? What do you view as my strengths? And like you mentioned, that won't land for everybody. They don't always believe it, But that's a good place to start, is asking somebody else what they see in you. What strengths do I have? You can also mention it to your therapist. Your therapist knows so much about you and is likely able to help pinpoint a few of what they view your strengths as. The other thing, if you're looking for like a very assessment research based way to find out what are my strengths, is Don Clifton, who I mentioned. I have my foundation in strengths with kind of him, and his philosophy is he's developed an assessment that individuals can take that give you a list of what your top 4 or top 5 talents are. And so this is called your Clifton Strengths Assessment. This is an assessment you can take, and it will lay out exactly what your top 5 talents are, how they apply to you, ways that you can use them, and just definitions, just different ways that they might show up in your life that you might not necessarily view or have insight that that's how you use them. So those are kind of 3 different ways that you can like figure out what your strengths are. And then I also encourage people to sit down and, okay, say this list says that my strength might be empathy. I encourage people to sit down and reflect, really genuinely reflect, like, how have I used empathy in the past 2 weeks? And I guarantee you can come up with an answer. Maybe it's how have you used empathy towards yourself? How have you used empathy towards somebody else? But I guarantee you there is a way that you have used that strength, that talent, without even knowing.
Awesome. Well, I love those recommendations, and I hope that people will follow through. I've also assigned like homework after a session to interview friends and family or colleagues to find out what someone's strengths are. And sometimes people are a little bit hesitant to do that because they feel a little bit awkward. So I usually say, you know what, you can blame me, you can blame someone else for doing the exercise. But I do think that people find the exercise to be really meaningful. They're getting perspective that they wouldn't have received otherwise.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
So right now we are recording in January. A lot of people right now have New Year's goals. Some people might have already given up on their goals. And I'm wondering, how can people use their strengths when they're setting out on a new endeavor? Maybe it's I have a New Year resolution, or I have a new goal that I'm working on. I want to do this new business. I have this new idea. How can people make use of their strengths, or how can they use that to achieve their goals?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you are talking about like SMART goals in a subsequent session, but SMART goals are a great way to, excuse me, Melissa. SMART goals are a great way to kind of set goals for your New Year's resolution. How am I going to achieve them? How am I going to accomplish this? And so I won't totally dive into SMART goals today. Maybe that's another session. But when you're looking at steps to actually follow through with that SMART goal, I think using your strengths are a great way to start by doing that. So I can kind of give a personal example. So Melissa, I don't know if you know this about me or not, but I am at my core a negative person about myself.
I
So when it comes,
never would have guessed that, Jordan. Ever. Never in a million years.
Yep, I own it. Being positive is not one of my strengths. It is not something that I am naturally or inherently good at. Maybe a bit more so for other people, but for myself, definitely a glass half empty kind of person. So being positive has always been a goal, somewhere where I want it to go for myself. And so actually last year I set a goal for myself was to be more positive. That's a really, really vague goal. And knowing that positivity is just not naturally something that I exude. But what is something that I naturally am pretty good at, something that I consider to be one of my strengths, is responsibility. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. If Melissa, if you give me a task to do, I am going to put my all into it.
I will
And
love that
so,
about you, Jordan.
thank you, Melissa. And so, you know, how does responsibility relate to being positive? I don't know. When I really sat down and thought about it, I was like, there's no way that positivity relates to responsibility. How am I going to be a more positive person? And so what I did was I really broke down like, okay, what works for me about being responsible? Having tasks, having that to-do list to check off. And so I know I'm naturally not going to be that positive person. I'm not going to wake up and be a ray of sunshine. And so I reframed what positivity meant to me. I reframed that, Jordan, it is your responsibility to create that positivity for yourself. If you are not naturally going to be that positive ray of sunshine, then you're going to make it your job to create that positivity for yourself. And so that led me to create a mantra for myself that I repeat to myself every morning when I was driving to school, when I was driving myself to LifeSpring's office. I get in my car and I say, you are responsible for your positivity today. And that mantra, it sounded really silly to me at first, but it has made the world of difference. And maybe it's just because we met halfway through last year that you haven't seen the negative side of me, that I've been able to show up with that positive energy, that smile on my face. Um, but by reframing that, just because you have an area of your life that you want to be better at, that it is not a deficit. There are ways for you to use your strengths to enhance those areas of your life where you wish things were better. So I know that totally didn't give you a set equation on how to do it, but I learn best from personal examples. So that is the best way for me to answer your question, is kind of with my own example of how I was able to do that for myself.
I love that example. And I love how you were able to make that connection. Even though we might say, what in the world do responsibility and
Mm-hmm.
positivity have in common? You were able to find it. You were able to find
Yeah.
how to connect it. So I think that that's a great example.
Thank
One of
you.
the things that I find is that sometimes we can take our strengths for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes see this in people who maybe want to be business owners, for example. They
Mm-hmm.
might want to have a business, but they're like, I know how to do copywriting. Like everybody knows how to do that. That's not special. That's not such a big deal. Or whatever their thing is. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes we just take it for granted because we know a lot of people in our industry. And so we think that
Mm-hmm.
it's not so special. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can not take our strengths for granted, or not just
Mm-hmm.
assume that because it's familiar to us, or because it's that something is easy for us, that it's
Mm-hmm.
not valuable to other people.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I saw that a lot in college students I was working with, where they'd say, me and my friend have the same exact strengths on this Clifton Strengths Assessment. Like, okay, big whoop. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we are more than just one thing. We are more than just good at copywriting. You have so many different strengths. And I love this statistic from the people at Clifton Strengths. It's oh, I don't want to get the number wrong, but it is something like there are 1 in 33 million odds that somebody has this exact same top five strengths as you. 1 in 33 million odds that somebody is just like you. So how can we sit here and say like, oh, I'm just another number. I'm just another copywriter. You are more than that. You might have that skill as a copywriter, but you are also empathetic. You might also be analytical. You might also have that positivity that Jordan so wishes she had. There is nobody else like you in the way that you show up every single day.